Welcome to Brazos Matters. I'm Jay Sokol. Well, you may or may not know that KAMU is one of 10 Texas PBS stations. And in fact, KAMU has been Aggieland's PBS station since 1970, providing you with programming for children and families and lifelong learners of all ages. But one of the latest Texas PBS collaborations is with Texas Monthly for a brand new docuseries called Texas Monthly Presents. And it is a visually stunning collection of storytelling from Texas Monthly journalists who deliver some unique insights about our state. And that's exactly what you would expect from Texas Monthly and Texas PBS. So today we're visiting with one of those writers, Mike Hall, who has a segment in the first episode of Texas Monthly Presents, which is now streaming on PBS Passport. That segment relates to a location only a few miles west of the Texas A&M campus, the history and the families connected to that history and soil. So I've watched it. It is captivating. So first, a quick bit about Mike, University of Texas graduate who's been with Texas Monthly since 1997. His other career stops include the Austin American Statesman, Austin Chronicle, Third Coast Magazine, and Trouser Press, which is a name that I love. His stories have appeared in the Best Magazine Writing, the Best American Sports Writing, the New York Times, and Men's Journal. So, Mike, I'm tired of hearing myself talk. I would love for you to tell us, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. I would love for you to tell us about the story we will find in this premiere episode of Texas Monthly Presents.
Yeah, this is a story about a woman named Gloria Smith, who is retired, lives in Fort Worth, and when she used to talk about, she talked about how her mother would, when Gloria was a little girl growing up in Fort Worth, all of her friends would leave for the summer, and they would go where they would say they would go down home. And she was like, "What is down home?" And well, it's where their grandparents lived. And it was usually someplace in East Texas, out in the rural parts of East Texas, where they would ride horses and swim in creeks. And you couldn't do that in Fort Worth. And she would ask her mom, "Where's our down home?" And her mom said, "Well, we don't really have a down home." And so Gloria was like this urban girl. And one day she had kids, and one day one of her daughters was interviewing her mother and talking about some of the family history. And it turned out that they had relatives who grew up somewhere in a place called Burleson County,
Right.
which she didn't know anything about. And she did some research and found that in fact, she had relatives who had grown up in these little tiny towns called freedom colonies, not far from A&M. And this was, in her words, her down home. And so she spent then the next few years seeking out where her people came from in this little freedom colony. And that became part of the story.
So the Freedom Colony is called Dabney Hill, correct?
Yes.
Dabney Hill. And I have to tell you, I'm a little ashamed that I wasn't familiar with the Freedom Colony label for these post-Civil War black communities. And certainly was unaware of Dabney Hill and its proximity to College Station. But tell me a little bit about Dabney Hill.
Yeah, Dabney Hill was a little community formed by a guy named, I believe it was Daniel Dabney, who been had been born in slavery in somewhere in eastern part of the United States. They'd come to Texas, and after Juneteenth, after the war and after the enslaved people were freed, many African Americans would form these communities that became known as freedom colonies, where they would buy land and basically build their own communities and build their churches and build their schools, because this was after the Civil War in East Texas. And if you were an African American, you weren't going to get a chance to own your own home or send your kids to school or a decent school or choose your own church. And so these freedom colonies came about after that time. And one of the men who had come from the who had been freed was Daniel Dabney, and he started this little community. He built a church. He built a Masonic lodge. and built this little community, and it was a thriving community called Dabney Hill. There were other freedom colonies in the area, because there were a lot of African Americans in the area, and they would all found these little communities, these uh, communities where they could worship and live and raise their kids the way they wanted to.
So, what has become of Dabney Hill? And by the way, for our listeners and viewers who are local to Bryan College Station, Brazos County, and so forth, Dabney Hill, I believe, as you head west on Highway 60, like towards Snook, it's sort of off to the right or to the north, I guess it would be, and I don't know how much of it is visible from Highway 60, but what is the state of Dabney Hill now?
Well, it's the closest big city is Snook.
Yeah, right.
It's just up the road from Snook. Um, and there's not a whole lot there. I mean, there's basically what Gloria discovered was she found this old Baptist church. And but the church was not in very good shape, and it was starting to cave in on itself. There were still people worshiping there.
Hmm.
uh, as she got involved with, she realized she wanted to help save this church. Even though she lived in Fort Worth, she was in retirement. She was looking for a passion project, and she and her husband would come down, and she started getting these grants to try and build this church back up. Um, the church eventually, a big storm came through. I know you all have some crazy storms there.
Yeah.
Big storm came through and knocked the whole thing down. And she had gotten a grant to fix up this church as, an old freedom colony. However, the conditions of the grant said, well, this is a total loss. You can't do that. So she decided to work on the lodge. It was called the Ethiopian Star Lodge, which had been used for decades. And so she started what you have. If you go to Dabney Hill now, you will find the basically the remains of the church, which have caved in on itself, and then behind it is this lodge, which is still the original foundation, the original walls. It's like a two-story. It looks like a big garage apartment.
Hmm.
Um, Pretty old wood. It's got a bunch of ivy growing up along the sides, and that is what she's going to use the money to renovate and try and turn this into, basically a historical destination, and to this freedom colony.
Do you know if there are still descendants of those original families who live in that area?
I don't know that. I was not There are not a whole lot of people who do live in that area, or
Yeah.
if they do live there, they're not from there. They've come in and they bought land. It's very pretty.
Yeah.
There's there's some developments that are moving. Everything's moving west from College Station, and there's a lot of development going on. So I don't know if there are that many who are actually. I'm sure there are some
Yeah.
from the Dabney family.
Yeah. I was looking, I guess, Google Earth. I was taking a look at that area, and I can see rooftops, in proximity of the old church and the lodge and so forth, but, not exactly sure what those rooftops represent. And you talked about in the story that there is development starting to encroach, and
Right.
I don't know if there is anybody, say, with the state of Texas or even with Burleson County, um, in positions of authority who even care to try to help protect and preserve.
Yeah. I mean, what Gloria Smith was able to do was get a grant and buy the actual land. She bought an acre
Hmm.
where the church and the Masonic Lodge sit. And so she was able to create this space which will be protected. I mean, she's got a state historical marker, and nothing's gonna happen with that. But she's trying to turn it into basically a destination for people to go and appreciate the history there of Dabney Hill. And there's an old school across the street and a giant gymnasium from the old segregated high school that was built back in the 40s or 50s, and she's trying to turn that big gym into like a community center,
Hmm.
and turn it into a destination for people to go and appreciate African American history in that part of the state.
What kind of help is Gloria getting, or is she an army of one in this?
Well, her husband helps her a lot. Her husband's a pastor, and they raised their kids, two of whom went to A&M, and so they come down. This is kind of like her passion project. She has gotten several grants, which have helped her a lot. She's found some allies with a group called Preservation Texas. She's found some college professors who have helped her, writing the grants and helping her understand the history. So she's the general of an army of a handful, and she's super passionate about it. And this is what really attracted us to her story was, it wasn't just the story of this freedom colony, it was the story of Gloria Smith and her, passion to save this history, which was related to her family, but also she wanted to save Texas history.
Yeah. Um, what are some of the obstacles, the additional obstacles besides the church collapsing from a storm, that Gloria Smith described encountering along the way these years?
Well, I mean, part of it is just the nature of progress, the fact that development is moving through these areas where this land has basically been abandoned. I mean, this land had been owned by these African American families, but many of them lost title to the land as they moved to cities, moved to big cities, left the rural life behind. And a lot of the African Americans of that time, they were many of them weren't literate, and they didn't have wills, or they weren't particularly in a trusting mood about going down to the courthouse and dealing with the authorities, and so they didn't do the the proper things you need to do to make sure that your heirs get the land.
Hmm.
And so a lot of this land was just abandoned. And so it was very easy to be sold at auction. And so the you know the march of progress, the development, and because that's an area where a lot of people are wanting to move, either because it's beautiful or because of they want to be near Texas A&M. Um, that was a big hindrance was coming up against that. It wasn't like there were any bad guys in it. It was just that was just kind of the nature of the last, 100 years of progress in the area. So I think that was a big part of what she's been up against.
Yeah. So the best outcome for Gloria Smith, it sounds like, would be preserving this lodge, getting that reconstructed and in shape um, for gatherings and so forth, and then this gym renovation as well as a community space. What else does she dream of that whole area being?
Yeah, I mean, she would really like to, create a museum and have people come and see the history of Dabney Hill and like I say, there are other freedom colonies in the area. These little tiny communities which were thriving, 100 years ago and uh, no longer are. And I think she would like to see the same kind of passion that she brought to it. See if other folks would start bringing these other places back because they're everywhere. There's an organization run by a former A&M professor named Dr. Andrea Roberts called the Texas Freedom Colonies Project. And they have found more than 500 freedom colonies in East Texas. Many of these, they actually found the ruins of these places, but many other ones are still around. There are still communities that survived all these years. And some, I mean, I live in Austin. There are like a dozen freedom colonies in Austin that grew up and got integrated into the main city.
Hmm.
You still see this in a lot of East Texas too. These little communities that are just waiting to be discovered. And I think Gloria would love it if other people would, do what she did, which is, get super passionate about something and go make it happen.
I spent a little time on the Texas Freedom Colonies Project website because I wondered, like, how many of these things are even around here? And
Yeah.
if you go to the map and zoom into this area, the little dots are all around us. And yeah, and not necessarily out in rural areas. There's
Right.
some much closer into Bryan College Station and so forth. And there's varying levels of information available, but there are some archival photos and other documents. I mean, it was a fascinating repository for information about these.
Yeah, there are a bunch around, like the one that originally got Gloria going near Snook was called Old Bethlehem.
Hmm.
But then there are others called like St. Lincoln and Pleasant Grove and Center Line. And you can just picture these folks, back in 1875 or whenever saying, what are we going to call this place? We'll call it Henley Hill, we'll call it Dabney Hill. And, you can just see, you can just picture this history taking place. It's just totally fascinating.
We'll do a quick reset here. If you just tuned in, I'm Jay Sokol. You're listening to Brazos Matters. We're visiting with Texas Monthly writer Mike Hall about the Dabney Hill Freedom Colony. It's located just a few miles west of the Texas A&M campus, and the fight to preserve part of the history from the post-Civil War black community located there. Um, if you would, Mike, talk to me about how you turned this story into one with a visual component. Was it always intended to have a visual element, or did this start out as just a print story?
Actually, this one started out as a visual story. Usually it's the other way around. But Noah Schwartzbard, who was our video guy, had found this story and had actually done some filming on it and had met Gloria Smith. And he showed it to me, showed some of his footage to me, and it just had all the earmarks of a great Texas Monthly story, where you had this, one person who was, there's nothing like obsessiveness for
Hmm.
a magazine story, and here was, Gloria was so obsessed, and she was obsessed because it had something to do with who she was and her past, but also the more she did it, it became an obsession of hers because she wanted to preserve history, Texas history. And those are the kinds of stories that if you're a journalist, you're like, wow, this is something that I want to, I'm really glad we're doing a video component, but we really need to write about this as well and put it in the magazine. And so that was the start of that.
It really has a beautiful feel to it, and I really hope people go to PBS Passport and stream this because it does. It has a feeling and a vibe to it. Can you kind of put into better words than I can what people will experience?
Well, it's got this kind of elegiac feel about the past, about these communities that are long gone. But the way Owen shot it, I mean, we've got drone footage going over the church and the lodge, and it's the way that it's shot and the way the story is told. It's told through through Gloria's words more than anybody's. It's just got this, just like the best history when you can feel the life and the history, when you can feel the life of those people, and they're not just like black and white uh, caricatures from the past, but when you can see them as real live people,
Hmm.
that to me is really good history telling because it makes you can feel the connection inside you. You can see Gloria feeling that connection, and then when she tells the story, we can feel it too. And just I don't know, just the way it's shot, and it's just very 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 beautifully shot, very elegiac, but also kind of hopeful in the
Hmm.
way that Gloria has devoted her life to doing this thing. she's found her passion, and she wants to spread this passion to other people too. And you hope other people will pick up the ball and do this for some of these other places, Henley Hill and these other, little communities.
How much influence did you have on the way this story looked? Were you sort of helping direct shots and providing that kind of feedback, or did you kind of stand back a little bit and let the videographer do his work?
Oh no, it was all Owen. I mean, when you're, it, to me, it was kind of like being a writer and having a really good editor. A lot of times when you're a journalist, you're going out and you're reporting, you're bringing all this information back, and then you're putting the story together based on your reporting.
Hmm.
So in for Owen in the video, I was just another uh, part of the puzzle for him to tell this story. It was kind of a way to have the journalistic voice along with the voice of the hero of the story, who is Gloria. So yeah, I was just waiting to be told what to do.
Do you have previous experience with video storytelling as well, or have you just always been a print guy?
I've mostly been a print guy. I
Hmm.
mean, we've Texas Monthly has experimented with video in the past, but and now we work with Texas Country Reporter,
Hmm.
um, and we have a great partnership doing that. But I mean, we have over the last year, because of Texas Country Reporter, but also now our partnership with PBS, we're trying to find other ways of telling stories. I mean, for years, Texas Monthly was just on paper. And then the internet came along, and we have had to figure out a way to be online and on paper. And now this is a whole new way of telling stories. It's kind of like podcasts in its own way, but of course with a visual element. And when you tell a story visually, it's very different from telling it on the page. Um, and for one thing, there are a lot fewer words, and
Hmm.
you can use a lot of what I do as a journalist is try and create a visual image in a reader's head. Well,
Hmm.
when you got a talented videographer like Owen, that's already being done, and so it's a different way of telling a story, and it's kind of fun for someone like me who's told stories a certain way for years and years, and then to all of a sudden have this opportunity where you're using drones and you're using these really cool new cameras and music, and it opens up storytelling in a way that I hadn't really thought of.
Yeah. Looking a little bit at your bio information, it looks like you're a versatile writer. You've had experience writing about a lot of different kinds of topics, whether it's sports or it's sitting in a courtroom covering cases and so forth. Where's the sweet spot for you? Where do you do your best work?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I mean, I do a lot of stories, legal stories, do a lot of music stories. And I mean, for me, you're trying to find the stories where you, like I said a little bit earlier, you're trying to find stories about passion, obsession, whether it's, I've done a lot of stories on innocent men and women in prison
Mm-hmm.
and the passion that they have to be freed is, I mean, none of us wants to be so misunderstood that we're thrown in prison for something we didn't do. Boy, when you talk with somebody who is an innocent person who's been in prison for 20 years, that passion to get out and to clear their name. And, I mean, it's a similar kind of passion with some of the musicians I've profiled, the passion to play their music, to tell their stories. You look for that thing at the heart of a story, whether it's a legal story or a music story or a history story.
Yeah.
I mean, those terms sound kind of dry until you connect with the person at the heart of it, like Gloria Smith, you know, and all of a sudden this story, it's not just a history story, it's a history story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, so after doing the story with Gloria and about Dabney Hill, um, has it made you kind of curious about, you know what, on my own time, I may go explore some other Freedom Colony locations because they are all around?
Oh, they're all, like I say, I live in Austin. I used to work at a place called Wheatsville Co-op. Well, Wheatsville used to be called Wheatville, and it was an African American freedom colony,
Hmm.
founded right after the Civil War. And so they're all around us, and it's once you open your eyes to that, and you open your eyes to this living history all around us, yeah, you can't help but want to know more. Uh, they're all over East Texas. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love East Texas. East Texas has so much history. It has so much conflict. It has so much tension. But man, when you get below a lot of that, it's got all this life and just great stories.
Yeah. Mike, can you tell us what maybe a next story is that you're working on we might be able to read from you or
Oh
watch?
boy, I'm working on a story right now about Texas has a school for the blind. It's
Yeah.
been there since the 1850s. Well, I have been following a group of kids there who play synthesizers and have a band and put out CDs and play shows.
Huh.
And they're some of the most inspirational kids I've ever met in my life. They're aged 12 to 19. And so I've been following them all year, and we're going to have a story coming out at some point this summer on them. And again, it's a story about incredible passion, incredible obsession. The teacher who gets these kids together, shows them how to do it, and then kind of leads them to make this incredible music on synthesizers.
Wow.
Not on good. Most Texas music is made on guitars and fiddles and pianos. No, no, these are synthesizers. It's just totally fascinating. And these kids are just the bravest, most creative, and fun kids. And I'm very excited about that story. So the band is called the Semi Modulars, and hopefully this story will come out later this summer.
That sounds amazing. Well, Texas Monthly Presents is streaming now on PBS Passport. By the way, it's available to KAMU supporters for $60 a year in donation. You can go to our website for that. Mike, thanks so much for your time and for telling this story. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Brazos Matters is a production of Aggieland's Public Radio, 90.9 KAMU FM, a member of Texas A&M's Division of Community Engagement. Our show is engineered and edited by Matt Dittman. All Brazos Matters episodes are available on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. Thanks so much for listening and for watching. We appreciate your time. I'm Jay Sokol. Have a great day.